Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Pleasure to be with you. Naysayers go to the head of the line at 866. Hey, Lars. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. All the way back to January of this year, when we first started talking about the China virus, I've asked the question of every medical professional I get on the show, are you going to get immunity from having had and recovered from the coronavirus? And the answer I've had for most of that period of time has been, well, we think so. It happens with a lot of diseases, but there are diseases you can catch, and then you can catch them again. And so it's been an open question. Now, lately, there seem to be indications that having coronavirus gave you immunity against getting it again, maybe even enough immunity that you could pass it on through what's called convalescent plasma, which means they take plasma out of your body, separate out the red blood cells, shove them back in, tell you to drink a lot of water and eat a steak, and then they give the convalescent plasma to somebody else. I'm not sure Dr. Kevin Pham is going to like my description of that medical procedure, but it comes reasonably close, doesn't it, Doc?
I mean, I love everything that ends with a steak, so I think that's fine.
God, you and me both, buddy. But tell me this: have we settled the science on whether or not people get immunity from this? Because we're hearing about some people, maybe not most, maybe not even a majority, who have had coronavirus, COVID-19, and then they get it again. But if they have immunity, they shouldn't be getting it again. Are these outliers? Or is this the way this disease works? And I'll bet you could tell us about other common diseases where you don't necessarily get immunity from having had it and survived it.
So there are cases of people who are getting reinfected. That is, not people who are getting a resurgence of the same disease, but they're getting infected with a different with the same virus, but from somewhere else coming in, rather than the same one staying in place and popping up again. There are some cases of that, but they seem to be fairly few and far between. And just since this virus has gotten so far around the world already, then it stands to reason that some people may have that happen to them. It's since it's supposed to be a rare thing, but it seems like this more has to do with the person and developing an insufficient immune response than it has to do with the behavior of the virus itself. I was just looking at a study. This one came out of China, so they have a lot of data there. And they took samples of the virus and mixed it with convalescent plasma, and they are seeing that the plasma from convalescents is neutralizing the virus in these samples. So just based on that, the antibodies that we develop should be neutralizing the virus. So I mean, science has never truly settled on anything, but the emerging data does suggest that once we have these antibodies, then they will be effective in preventing reinfection.
I'm talking to Dr. Kevin Pham, who's a contributor at Daily Signal and a former graduate fellow in health policy over at the Heritage Foundation. So, Dr. Pham, the other question is, and I'm sure this is going to come up, these viruses all mutate at some level, right? I mean, in other words, when we say COVID-19, it's a bit like grouping people together and saying that group. But COVID-19 actually describes a virus of which, if you find it in, say, in Europe, you may have a slightly different genetic signature than the one you find in the United States. Or am I wrong about that?
No, that's correct. All viruses, especially mRNA viruses, which is what this coronavirus is. It's an RNA virus. They mutate over time because they're not very careful about how they rewrite themselves when they replicate, and so they pick up little mutations over time. And using those mutations, we're able to track the lineages of these viruses. But what we're seeing is that they're still relatively similar from one strain to the next strain. So it's not really a group of people that we're looking at. If we're talking about people, it would be more like we're looking at a large extended family. Not even that extended though. An extended family would be something more like the influenza, for instance. That is something that we have to get vaccinated every year, and it's not because we lose our immunity to it every single year. The immunity doesn't last extremely long, but it should last more than a year. But we have to keep getting vaccinated because of what's called antigenic. I always forget this. It's either antigenic shift or antigenic drift. Shift or drift, one of those two. But what happens is that the virus reassorts itself into something else entirely, and so if the flu had different signals on it, it takes one signal, it brings it back down, and then puts up a new one. That's why we have H1N1 and H7N2. Like those numbers, when they change, that's a whole different virus that we're looking at. It's still influenza, but it looks completely different to our immune system. With the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2, what we're seeing is that it's a lot more stable. It spends a lot more time trying to replicate itself well, at least better than the influenza virus. And so a vaccine that does come out is probably going to be fairly effective for most of the cases, better than influenza probably.
Well, that was kind of circling back to asking a follow-up to the other question. If we see somebody get sick with coronavirus, COVID-19, and then they recover fully and they don't have a recurrence of that one, but then they get sick again in those outlying cases, is it because they're getting a slightly different mutated version of coronavirus, or are the mutations big enough to actually make it a new one, like you mentioned with the influenza, where you got 5 or 6 of them that you get in the shot, but there may be 100 of them out there, and they're kind of taking a guess. We think these 5 or 6 are the ones that are coming this season, so those are the ones we're going to vaccinate against. That in this case, is the person getting sick from a different version of COVID, or are they truly just acquiring the same COVID again?
It's a little bit of both, probably. For one, they probably didn't build up a specific enough immune response to it, because the immune system, it tailors the antibodies to the virus itself. And so if it's targeted towards one branch of the family, then the branch on the other side might be different enough. But I'm looking at a different study now. What we're seeing here in this other study about antibodies is that convalescent plasma is neutralizing the virus, but also plasma from people who are unexposed to the virus at all also show some neutralizing effect. And these are people who have a common cold or something like that. A little bit. There seems to be some cross-reactivity with people who have had other viruses. Because some of the common cold is a large group of viruses. Some are coronaviruses, some are not. There seems to be some cross-reactivity with immunity to those coronaviruses to this current coronavirus. So, like I said, it seems like there's enough of a stability in the genetic code of the COVID-2 virus that we're dealing with now that antibody responses that we create should be enough to neutralize and prevent reinfection. So it could be an insufficient immune response, or it could be it's different enough that it just narrowly bypasses a person's immunity. So those two things can happen together because each person makes their own antibodies, you see.
I'm talking to Dr. Kevin Pham. So, Dr. Pham, let me ask you this. Because one of the points I got from the medical pros, which I then repeat to my audience, and I don't want to be wrong, but I said, well, this coronavirus is called novel because it's a brand new one, which means we have no experience with it. But you're making the point that if some of those common colds that are out there that are also viruses provide or cause your body to make up some antibodies that might give you some resistance to coronavirus, is it possible that part of the solution is find out the one that gives you some resistance to it and then spread that common cold all over America as a defense against coronavirus? Or is that too crazy to contemplate?
It's actually not too crazy, and that is the basis for the original smallpox vaccine. The original smallpox vaccine was actually an inoculation of a live cowpox vaccine. So the very original vaccine was doing exactly what you're suggesting, is using a different related virus and using that to inoculate people, and they would develop an immune system against that. I would say that's probably not the best way to go about it, just because it's not going to be a very specific defense against it. And we have, I think, about 100 vaccines in the works right now. Those are going to be better targeted, and they're probably going to be better. They're more effective too. So I don't think we need to go and spread the common flu to everybody. How would that even look? But I don't think we
not
need
good
to get this antibodies.
Not real good. In fact, wasn't it Martha Washington who actually talked George into inoculating his troops against smallpox because it was taking apart both armies, and we managed to beat the British, and we became a country of our own because Martha Washington talked her husband into getting the troops inoculated. Although I think they called it something different. I mean, it was really disgusting, putting needles into the pustules from one kind of pox and then sticking your skin with it. I'm glad we're in your era of medicine, Dr. Pham. Thanks so very much, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, you too.
That's Dr. Kevin Pham from the Daily Caller. Used to be at Heritage Foundation. Coming up, unwanted touching, sniffing, and hugging are never acceptable. But if Joe Biden does it, why does the mainstream media try to norm it?